Hello and welcome to Sky English. Today we're talking about Atomic Habits by James Clear, a game changer in building good habits, breaking bad ones, and making tiny changes that lead to big results. Stay tuned as we unpack key lessons.
All right, so are you ready to dive into this book with me today?
Definitely. I'm excited to talk about this one.
Me too. And I know a lot of you out there are probably already familiar with Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of a modern classic at this point.
It really is. I mean, the numbers are crazy. It's sold like 20 million copies or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's been translated into, I don't even know how many languages.
Over 60 languages.
Yeah.
It's insane. But what I'm really curious about is why this book has resonated with so many people.
Yeah. What makes it different from all the other self-help books out there?
Exactly, because let's be honest, there's no shortage of self-help books promising to transform your life.
That's for sure.
Hmm?
But I think what sets Atomic Habits apart is that it's not just about some quick fix or a motivational pep talk.
Right. It's more about understanding the science behind how habits work and then using that knowledge to create lasting change.
Exactly. Clear doesn't just tell you what to do. He explains why it works. He goes deep into the psychology and neurology of habit formation.
And he does it in a way that's really engaging and easy to understand.
Absolutely. It's not like reading a dry textbook or anything. It's full of real-world examples and relatable stories.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the key takeaways from the book. One of the things that really struck me was the idea of tiny changes adding up over time.
Oh, yeah. That whole 1% better every day concept. It's so powerful.
It is. It kind of blew my mind when I first read it. The idea that just making small incremental improvements each day can lead to massive results in the long run.
It's like compound interest but applied to your habits.
Exactly. You're not going to see huge changes overnight, but over time, those small improvements start to snowball and create a huge impact.
And I think that's a really encouraging message
Yeah.
because it means you don't have to make these radical changes all at once.
Right. You can start small and
Yeah.
just focus on getting a little bit better each day.
And the book is full of examples of people who have achieved incredible things through this approach.
Like that story about the British cycling team.
Oh, yeah. Dave Brailsford and the marginal gains philosophy.
It's amazing how they focused on making tiny improvements in every single area, from the aerodynamics of their bikes to the way they wash their hands.
And it led them to dominate the sport for years.
It just goes to show that even small changes, when compounded over time, can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. It's about being consistent and focusing on the process, not just the outcome.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of tiny changes, but what about the systems we create to support those changes?
Right, because it's not enough to just have good intentions.
Uh.
You need to have a system in place that makes it easy to stick to your habits.
And that's where Clear's 4 laws of behavior change come in.
Exactly. These laws are basically a framework for designing habits that actually stick,
So let's break them down. The first law is make it obvious.
which basically means make the cues for your desired habit really clear and visible.
So, for example, if you want to start exercising more regularly, you might lay out your workout clothes the night before.
Right. So when you wake up, you see those clothes and it triggers the thought, okay, time to work out.
It's about removing those decision points and making the good habit the default option.
Exactly. Because when you have to think about it too much, that's when willpower comes into play.
And willpower is a limited resource.
It is. It gets depleted throughout the day.
Yeah.
So the less you have to rely on it, the better.
Okay, so we've got make it obvious. What's the second law?
Make it attractive.
So how do you make something like exercise, which, let's face it, can feel like a chore, more appealing?
One technique Clear talks about is called temptation bundling, which is basically pairing something you want to do with something you need to do.
Oh, I like that. Give me an example.
Sure. Let's say you love listening to podcasts. You could make a rule that you only allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcasts while you're exercising.
So you're essentially linking the pleasure of the podcast to the act of exercising.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And over time, your brain starts to associate those two things together, making exercise more enjoyable.
That's brilliant. I'm totally stealing that idea.
It's a good one.
Hmm.
And it can be applied to so many different habits.
Okay, what about the third law?
The third law is make it easy.
That one seems pretty straightforward.
It does. But there's more to it than just choosing easy habits. It's about reducing the friction associated with your good habits and increasing the friction associated with your bad habits.
Okay, so give me an example of how you might reduce friction for a good habit.
One of my favorites is the flossing example Clear talks about in the book.
Oh, yeah, what was that one again?
Basically, he says, instead of keeping your floss tucked away in a drawer, Put it right next to your toothbrush.
So it's more visible and easier to access.
Exactly. You're removing those extra steps that might prevent you from flossing.
It's like you're setting yourself up for success by making the good habit as easy as possible.
Right. And you can apply this principle to so many different areas of your life.
Okay, and the fourth and final law.
Make it satisfying.
So this is all about the reward.
It is. It's about making sure that your good habits are enjoyable and rewarding.
But how do you make something like eating healthy or going to the gym, which might not feel good in the moment, satisfying?
Well, one way is to focus on the immediate rewards, even if they're small.
So for example, if you're trying to build a writing habit, you might reward yourself with a cup of coffee after you finish a certain amount of writing.
Exactly. Or if you're trying to eat healthier, you might allow yourself to have a small piece of dark chocolate after dinner.
It's about training your brain to associate the good habit with a positive feeling.
Right. And another powerful tool is using a habit tracker.
I've tried those before, but I always seem to lose motivation after a few weeks.
I hear ya. But habit trackers can be really effective if you use them the right way. The key is to find a tracker that works for you and to make it a visual reminder of your progress.
So you can actually see how far you've come.
Exactly. And that can be really motivating. It helps you stay on track and keep moving forward.
So we've got the 4 laws: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying.
Those are the 4 pillars of habit formation, according to James Clear.
And they're not just for building good habits, right? You can also use them to break bad habits.
Absolutely. You just have to invert the laws. So instead of making it obvious, you make it invisible. Instead of making it attractive, you make it unattractive.
And instead of making it easy, you make it difficult.
Right.
And instead of making it satisfying, you make it unsatisfying.
Exactly. It's about understanding the psychology of your habits and using that knowledge to your advantage.
This is all so fascinating. I'm already starting to think about how I can apply these principles to my own life.
That's great. And that's really the whole point of the book, to give people the tools they need to create lasting change.
I think one of the things that makes Atomic Habits so appealing is that it's not about some quick fix or overnight transformation.
It's about making small, sustainable changes over time.
And it's about understanding that setbacks are going to happen.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No one's perfect.
Yeah.
We all fall off the wagon sometimes.
But the key is to have a plan for when those setbacks occur.
Exactly. You need to have a system in place to help you get back on track.
And that's something we'll dive deeper into as we continue exploring the book.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to uncover.
Absolutely. Atomic Habits is a book that keeps giving. You can read it multiple times and still come away with new insights.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and dig into some more of the juicy stuff.
Sounds good. I'm ready. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into the world of Atomic Habits.
I'm excited to keep going. We've already covered so much ground, but there's still so much to unpack.
There really is. This book is packed with insights.
It is. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Clear's writing is that he doesn't just present these concepts in a vacuum.
Right. He backs them up with real-world examples and stories.
Exactly. He shows how these principles have actually played out in the lives of successful people.
And I think that's what makes the book so compelling, because it's not just theory, it's practical advice that you can actually apply to your own life.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some of those examples. What are some of the stories that really stood out to you?
Well, one that always comes to mind is the story about British cycling.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. Remind me how that one goes.
So for years, British cycling was kind of a mediocre team. They weren't really winning any major races.
Right. They were kind of an underdog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then in the early 2000s, they hired this guy named Dave Brailsford as their performance director.
And Brailsford had this radical idea called the aggregation of marginal gains,
Yeah, or as it's more commonly known, the marginal gains philosophy.
which basically means focusing on making tiny 1% improvements in every single area.
Exactly. Instead of trying to find one big game-changing solution, they looked for every little thing they could possibly improve, even if it seemed insignificant.
So what kinds of things did they change?
Everything. They redesigned the bike seats to be more ergonomic. They tested different fabrics for their racing suits to reduce wind resistance.
They even went as far as teaching the riders the most effective way to wash their hands.
Yeah, to minimize the risk of getting sick. It sounds
Well,
crazy,
yeah.
but it all added up.
And the results were pretty incredible.
They were, within a few years, British cycling went from being a mediocre team to one of the most dominant forces in the sport.
They started winning Olympic gold medals and Tour de France titles left and right.
It was a complete transformation.
Yeah.
And it all came down to this philosophy of marginal gains.
That story is so inspiring because it shows that you don't have to be a genius or have some superhuman ability to achieve great things.
Right. It's about being consistent and focusing on the process of getting a little bit better each day.
And it's about not being afraid to experiment and try new things, even if they seem small or insignificant.
Exactly. Because you never know what's going to make a difference.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of tiny changes and the importance of systems. But there's another concept that Clear emphasizes that I think is really important.
Yeah. What's that?
The idea of identity-based habits.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. It's basically the idea that lasting change comes from shifting your self-perception, your identity.
So instead of just focusing on changing your behavior, you change your belief about who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, I'm trying to quit smoking, you would say, I'm a non-smoker.
Or instead of saying, I'm trying to lose weight, you would say, I'm a healthy person.
Right. It's about aligning your actions with your aspirations.
And I think this is so powerful because it's not just about willpower. It's about creating a new self-image.
Exactly. And when your actions are consistent with your self-image, it becomes easier to maintain those behaviors.
It's like you're not fighting against yourself anymore. You're actually becoming the person you want to be.
Right. And that's a much more sustainable approach to change.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the power of tiny changes, the importance of systems, and the idea of identity-based habits. Is there anything else from the book that you want to highlight?
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that Clear also talks about the importance of environment design.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's basically the idea that our surroundings have a huge impact on our behavior.
So if you want to make it easier to stick to your good habits, you need to create an environment that supports those habits.
Exactly. And conversely, if you want to break a bad habit, you need to make it harder to engage in that behavior.
So for example, if you're trying to eat healthier, you might get rid of all the junk food in your house.
Right. Or if you're trying to reduce your screen time, you might put your phone in another room at night.
It's about removing the temptations and triggers that lead to those unwanted behaviors.
And it's about making the good habits as easy and convenient as possible.
It's like you're setting yourself up for success by designing your environment in a way that supports your goals.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. But before we move on, I want to make sure we address one more thing.
What's that?
The fear of failure.
Ah, yes, that's a big one.
Because, let's face it, we're all human. We're going to mess up. We're going to fall off track sometimes.
Absolutely. No one's perfect.
But I think a lot of people get discouraged when they slip up. They think, oh, well, I guess I'm just not cut out for this.
Right. And that's where the idea of a failure recovery plan comes in.
Okay, explain that to me.
It's basically a strategy for getting back on track as quickly as possible after a slip-up.
So instead of beating yourself up and giving up, you have a plan in place to help you bounce back.
Exactly. It's about being kind to yourself and recognizing that setbacks are a normal part of the process.
And it's about not letting one slip up derail your entire progress.
Right. It's about having a long-term perspective and focusing on the big picture.
This is all so helpful. I feel like I'm getting a crash course in the psychology of habit change.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Atomic Habits so valuable. It's not just a collection of tips and tricks. It's a deep dive into the science of how our brains work.
And how we can use that knowledge to create lasting positive change in our lives.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about the science of habit formation, the power of tiny changes, the importance of systems, and even the idea of identity-based habits.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, but now I want to get practical.
Okay.
Because I know a lot of people listening are probably thinking, this is all great information, but where do I even begin?
Right. It can feel overwhelming.
It totally can.
Right.
So what's the first step? If someone wants to start implementing these principles into their life, where should they start?
Well, Clear talks about the importance of focusing on what he calls keystone habits.
Keystone habits, what are those?
Basically, a keystone habit is a foundational habit that has a ripple effect on other areas of your life.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Sure. Let's say you make it a habit to exercise regularly.
Okay.
This one habit can lead to improvements in your sleep, your energy levels, your mood, even your eating habits.
So it's like a domino effect. One positive habit leads to another.
Exactly. It creates a cascade of positive changes.
That's so cool. So it's not about trying to change everything at once. It's about finding that one key habit that can unlock a whole chain of positive outcomes.
Precisely. It's about focusing your energy where it will have the biggest impact.
I like that. But even starting small can feel daunting sometimes. What advice does Clear give for those days when motivation is low?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of environment design.
We talked about that a bit earlier, but can you remind me what that means?
Sure. It's basically the idea that our surroundings have a profound impact on our behavior.
So if you want to make it easier to stick to your good habits, you need to create an environment that supports those habits.
Exactly. And conversely, if you want to break a bad habit, you need to make it harder to engage in that behavior.
So it's not just about willpower, it's about setting yourself up for success by designing your environment in a way that makes it more likely you'll make good choices.
Right, because willpower is a finite resource. It gets depleted throughout the day.
So the less you have to rely on it, the better.
Exactly. That's why environment design is so important. It helps you conserve your willpower for the things that really matter.
Okay, so environment design is key. But what about accountability? How do we stay on track when we're the only ones watching?
That's where tracking your progress and having some kind of accountability system can be incredibly helpful.
So is that where habit trackers come in?
They can definitely be helpful. The key is to find a tracker that works for you and to make it a visual reminder of your progress.
So you can see how far you've come and stay motivated.
Exactly. Clear also talks about the power of finding an accountability partner, someone who will support you and keep you on track.
Like a workout buddy or a writing partner.
Exactly. It
Well,
could be anyone who you trust and who's willing to hold you accountable.
that's a great idea. And it doesn't have to be anything formal, just someone to check in with and share your progress with.
Right. It's about having someone in your corner who believes in you and wants to see you succeed.
Okay, so we've talked about environment design and accountability. But what about failure? Because let's face it, no one's perfect. We're all going to slip up at some point.
That's true. And Clear addresses this directly in the book.
Oh, good. Because I
Yeah.
think that's something a lot of people struggle with.
He says that setbacks are inevitable and that the key is not to let them derail your progress.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about having a plan for when you fall off track.
Exactly. He talks about the importance of having a failure recovery plan, a strategy for getting back on track as quickly as possible after a slip-up.
I love that because I think a lot of times when people slip up, they beat themselves up about it and then they give up altogether.
Right. But the truth is that slipping up is a normal part of the process. It doesn't mean you're a failure.
It just means you're human.
Exactly. And the important thing is to learn from your mistakes and get back on track as quickly as possible.
So don't let one bad day or one slip up derail your entire progress.
Just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and keep going.
I love that message. It's so encouraging and empowering.
It is. And I think that's one of the things that makes Atomic Habits such a powerful book. It's not about perfection. It's about progress.
And it's about recognizing that we all have the power to change our lives one small step at a time.
Absolutely. And I think that's a message that everyone can benefit from hearing.
I agree. Well, this has been such an incredible deep dive into Atomic Habits.
It really has.
I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm already thinking about all the ways I can apply these principles to my own life.
Me too. It's a book that I know I'll be coming back to again and again.
And I think that's the mark of a truly great book. It's one that you can read multiple times and still find new insights and inspiration each time.
Absolutely. If you're looking for a book that will help you understand the science of habit formation and give you the tools you need to create lasting positive change in your life, I highly recommend checking out Atomic Habits.
It's a game changer. And that's a wrap on this deep dive into Atomic Habits. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you learned something new along the way.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.
Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.
Sky English